just among fun. Military science fiction podcast. Books or stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Welcome to the Military Science Fiction Podcast. I am your host, Jeffrey H. Haskell, and this is your other host, Rick Partlow.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Today we are talking about the very unlimited topic of world building. And I say unlimited because while characters tell stories, world building gets people really invested in them, beyond the
World building is a lot of fun.
And it's a lot of fun. It can be a lot of fun. And Rick, this is your topic, so why don't you start us off?
Well, the first thing I would like to say is a cautionary note, because it's really, really easy to get totally caught up in world building, not just for a day, but for weeks, sometimes months. And
Some people for years.
yeah, some people for years. And the first cautionary note is world building is not the most important thing about your novel. That would be the characters in the plot, secondarily the plot. Characters are the most important thing for an indie, genre novel. But good world building, like in photography, the subject of your photograph is really important. It's the most important thing. But the background makes the photograph, professional, sellable, all that stuff. If you have a busy background with in photography, a busy background with lots of crap that's in focus, then you've got not as good of a photograph. It's not going to win awards. It's not going to sell. If you have a smooth, out of focus background that's like a solid color, sells more photographs. In world building, if your world that you've built for your characters feels real, feels like it could exist somewhere, then you have sold that to your reader. It's not the most important thing, but it's there in the background, and it'll catch your eye if it's not done right. I know that I've read a lot of science fiction books that the characters are memorable, and I like the action, but there was these glaring inconsistencies and anachronisms in their world building that took me out of the story. Not enough to ruin the book, but it's like, if you have that taken care of, then you won't get taken out of the story. You won't get people who have to think about, oh, is that realistic? Is that a good idea? Is that something that could happen? They won't have to think about that because it'll just blend into the background smoothly.
Yeah, and one thing too is to your cautionary part of the tale is that a lot of your warp plans don't survive contact with the enemy. So there's been a number of times where I have done world building stuff, in advance of my story. And then when I was writing the story, one of two things happened. One, I ended up not using any of that world building I did, because that part of the world was never explored. Or two, as I was writing the story, I realized, that was a really good idea, but it doesn't fit the story anymore, or it doesn't really work practically.
Well, that's the other cautionary tale is never be married to your world building, because the story might make you change it.
Yeah. So sometimes you'll come up with a really good idea for like a political system, or a couple of, like, I had this great idea for this planet I wanted to have this entire story take place on. It was like this fishing planet that was super rich, and it was kind of a play on the whole, like, one world, the mono sphere of a world. It's a desert world, it's an ice
Yeah.
world, it's whatever. This was like a fishing world, and if you think about where, like, barring a Star Trek style food replicator, your protein source has got to come from somewhere, and this world had was just like basically just this giant world with lots and lots of fish, and so ships would come down. Anyways,
So it's the Way of Kings world.
the whole story was going to take place on the world. Well, no, it was an ocean world, so it was like all ocean.
Remember the Way of Kings? Everything was like flooded and
Oh yeah, yeah. They always have the storms that went around the world. But
yeah.
and it was I spent probably 2 weeks coming up with like the different like because it was like a family system, like different families had controls over different parts of the world, and you know the system by which they fished, and you know the kind of ships they would use to come down and fish, because they weren't like out there with boats. They'd come down with spaceships basically that were specially outfitted and that would sit on the surface of the ocean and just start sucking up water and just catch everything that came up, and then the water would go out and all that would be left was like the biological materials. It was pretty cool. It was pretty neat. It would have been a great story. And there was going to be some really cool combat on it and everything. Then I started writing the story and I'm like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this other thing for this other world.
No
And
fish
yeah,
combat.
so um you get too wrapped up in your world building, and what will happen is that you will try and force your story to bend to the world building. And that is a recipe for disaster. Don't do that.
Yeah, the most important thing is your story and your characters. The world building can change, and if it screws up some future book, well, you can fix that later. The most important thing is the book you're writing. So don't be a slave to your world building. But I will say that one thing that world building can do for you is if you build an intricate enough world, stories will suggest themselves. You'll see a part of your world and you'll say, well, I can see where something would come out of that, where somebody from that milieu could wind up being stuck in this situation. And
You know,
that's handy too.
and also like when you put a lot of you don't need a lot of details in your world building, but you need a lot of suggestions of details. So when you're talking about your world in your books, you know, when your narrative is like discussing things about your world or explaining things, you know, write the one sentence that starts the discussion and then stop, because you don't need a info dump on world building as much as you want to. The less you can give your audience while you're explaining your world building, the better, because then that gives them fuel for their imagination, but it doesn't dictate every little thing to them. So if you talk about your political system and you're like, yeah, it's a hereditary democracy, and you're just like, what? You know, and then you don't say anything else, your audience is going to be like, what is going on here? That's not how democracies work. And so, you know, the the idea is you want your world to feel lived in. You want it to feel like it existed before the reader started reading the book and will exist after the reader started reading the book. And that there are things happening outside of just the immediate scope of the main character and you know the what's happening on the ship or the planet that they're on.
I like techno plutocracy,
Technocracy. So
which also would be a good name for a punk band.
when I was doing Against All Odds, it would be a good name for punk band. The I briefly mentioned that is an alliance and that there are worlds in that alliance, and some of them are pretty far away. But I didn't go into over details, so it left like a lot of room for people to be like, "Oh, well, maybe there's a planet like this, or maybe there's a planet like that." And you're in a collaboration with the reader, and you want the reader's imagination involved in that as much as possible. Because the more they imagine things that happened in your book that you didn't write, the more invested they are in your story.
Well, that's like in Wholesale Slaughter. There is five star kingdoms, I guess you call them, five governments.
I've always avoided using that because David uses it, and I try not to use
Well,
anything he
I don't
uses.
think I used that in the book. I'm just that's what they
Yeah, yeah,
were.
no, no, I know what you
Um,
mean.
and people used to ask me after the series was finished, "Oh, do you have like a map of these to show where they are?" And I'm like, "Where they are is wherever it worked for the plot that they had to be." Where, they're connected by wormholes, so they could
They could be
be
anywhere.
they could have you could have a system from one government here, system from another government here, and there's no wormhole connecting them because the nearest wormhole is from the other government. So they don't have to be next to each other.
Heck, maybe it'd be in the same galaxy at that point.
Mhm. So, well, eventually they did develop a warp drive, so it couldn't be another galaxy. But Yeah,
It'd be funny though if they developed that warp drive only to find out that every Star Kingdom is in a different galaxy.
yeah, that would be inconvenient. Um, but like I said, don't let your world building override your story. But as I also said, it can be a lot of fun, and if it gets you in a creative mindset, if it gets you excited about the book or the series you're planning on writing, then it served its purpose. And whether or not any of it makes its way into the book, whether or not the readers ever find out half of the things you built, if it gets you in the mindset to write the book, then it's already a win.
Yeah, absolutely. And and world building can be a great way to get into open mode to sort of get your creative juices flowing and kind of propel you into writing that day. So if you're ever stuck on a day where you're just like, oh gosh, I really don't, nothing's happening, I don't really feel like I'm writing, explore a part of the world that you haven't explored yet, and just sort of start writing a little bit here and there. And then what you'll find is pretty quickly that um you're creative all of a sudden, and then it's time to start writing,
Or
the
if you're
story.
trying to come up with a new book or a new series, and you can't seem to come up with a great character or a great situation, just think, am I writing a, say, military science fiction series? Well, let me build a world and see where the wars might happen. And if that gets you in the mindset to create the characters, it'll, you know, get under people's skin, then that's a way you can get around maybe a creativity block. But
Yeah, for
but
sure.
but don't, like I said, don't make it a replacement. This should be an augmentation of you writing great characters and a great story.
Now, I have met people who just absolutely love world building, and that's kind of all they do. And they never actually get around to writing their novel. So, avoid that. I mean,
They should they
again,
should write an RPG.
Rick and I, yeah, right. Rick and I come from a place of like our goal is to write the best absolute book we could write so that it makes us the most absolute money it can make us. We're not hacks. We're not doing this just for the money. Do you remember that movie with what's his name? It was a movie about mercenaries. It was called The Substitute.
Yeah,
And
of course.
the main character's name actor was
Berenger.
Tom Berenger. Yeah, back when he was
I
really,
watched that
really
not that long ago.
yeah, and there was like a sequel with Treat Williams that was pretty good too. Um, and at one point in the movie, he turns down this job for a drug dealer. And what's funny is all his buddies in the movie, all his mercenary group, are like the same four semi-Hispanic dudes that you saw in every movie in the 90s. They were in
I
Aliens
know, yeah.
4, they were in Clear and Present Danger. They were just in every military movie of the 90s. It was kind of funny. And I think one of them, the main one, went on to be in Breaking Bad as like one of the main villains. But
Yeah, yeah. Tuco?
yeah, Tuco, yeah.
Yeah.
I think both of them were in it at one point. Both those guys. But
So the
at
mercenaries
one
from the
point,
substitute broke bad.
yeah, at one point he turns down the run working for the drug dealer, and his buddy's like, "Hey man, we're mercenaries. I hate to break it to you, but we need the money." And he's like, the definition of mercenary? It's someone who works merely for money. It's not the money part that bothers me, it's the merely. And um I am not in this merely for money. I'm in it for the money, but I'm also in it to tell a great story and to really move people and inspire them and make them feel a connection, like an emotional connection to the books that I'm writing for the money. Because if I wasn't making money at this, I wouldn't be able to do it. I
You have to get a
love,
real job.
I love, I love the idea, the fanciful flights of fancy where someone could just decide they want to be a writer and the state would take care of them and allow them to explore their writing. But that's not how the real world works. How the real world works is that I do something that other people value and they give me money for that. And so the more money I can make, the more I can do the thing that they value without having to periodically get other jobs to cover my healthcare benefit costs or shore up a year because my son went deaf or whatever. So the the goal, so if your goal isn't to make money. If your goal is just like I'm a creative person and this is okay, like Rick and I are always saying this is okay. It's okay if you
Not that
just
there's
want to do
anything
this as a
wrong with
hobby.
that.
Nothing wrong with it. If your goal is just to do it as a hobby, just to do it for fun, you just want to explore world building, by all means. These principles all still work. They all still work. But when Rick and I are talking, we're talking about our goals as authors, which is to make money and sell books. So, if you're like, well, that's just something you do if you want to make money, then you can ignore that part. But if it is something you're doing because you want to make money, you don't want to spend 6 years world building before you start writing your novel. Because I promise you, the moment you start writing
unless
your novel,
unless you
most of
started
it's
like
gone.
I did when you're 18, and then you have all this world building done by the time you're 25 and ready
You
to start
know,
writing.
I started world building Grimm's War universe probably 20 years ago. None of it that I ever world built ever before I started actually writing in 2020, writing the book series in 2020, made it into the book. I changed almost everything about it.
See, I
Um,
didn't. I kept most of the world building I did in in those early days when I was like a teenager writing stuff down in church, and coming up with government names and starship drives and all this stuff. I've used a lot of that. I mean, not just not just as background for the main books, but I have like invented series just based on that. So it really came in handy once I actually decided to do this for a living.
yeah, and also the experience of world building really helps you like get better at what you're doing as a writer. It helps you learn what works and what doesn't work. I know a lot of people who are in high school and they it seems to be a lot of fantasy writers do this. They have some epic fantasy trilogy that they imagined in high school and they're just married to that trilogy and they can't let it go. And a lot of I'm always telling people this too, is a lot of being a successful writer is moving forward and not looking back. And the number of writers I know who have written a trilogy, it was moderately successful, but they're like, oh, I'm going to put new covers on it and I'm going to go back in and I'm going to
Yeah.
rewrite it now that I'm a better writer. And I'm just like, it's never going to make you as much money as it did originally.
Like Boston said in the 1970s, don't look back.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta keep moving forward. And it's kind of the same thing with world building. If you build a world and you write a book series in it and the book series doesn't do it, sure, you can like use parts of that world building that you did for another series. But you do need to move forward and you do need to move on and do something else to maximize your chances of hitting it with your next series. You don't want to just, create a new character in the same universe and because you never know. It's easy to know. I say it's easy to know. I know why my books are successful. Not everybody does, but I also know why the books failed, and I work really hard to know that. So if you write a series and it fails and you don't necessarily know why, your best bet is just to start over from scratch on a new series and not like try to force that universe or that world to work because it could be that world just sucks. But if you
Your
don't get
world
it,
sucks,
if it doesn't
but it's the only
succeed, then
world you
you don't get any
got.
reviews and you don't know. So, what was that, Rick?
I said, your world sucks, but it's the only world you got.
Yeah.
Um,
I world building is not my favorite thing. I don't dislike it. I don't enjoy it as much as a lot of other people do. I'm more interested in characters and I guess technology is world building, but in technology than I am in like the political system and the different planets and the different cultures and civilizations and all that other stuff. I really like how does the ship combat work and how does the daily life aboard ship operate and things like that.
this isn't military science fiction, it's more fantasy, but I did get off on a tangent because I started thinking about the fantasy epic trilogy that I'll never write. And
Don't say that.
I, I, I realized I had been like shoving into the background a couple of world building things that I didn't think were important, but if you look at them, they're very important to the story. Um, One of them is how big the cities are in your fantasy novel. And that is a function of agriculture.
And
How much
logistics.
agricultural fields do you have around the city? Or do you have a river, like a big river or a big lake where fish is brought in that can supplement the agriculture? Because if you are going purely off of farm fields, say you're inland city, that limits your population to maybe 20, 30 or 40,000
Yeah, without a
maximum.
river and abundant farmland, there really is no inland city.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you don't
Uh,
usually have abundant farmland without rivers,
yes, that's true.
you know?
Um, but when I say river, I mean if you have a river that supplements your farmland, that's going to be something the size of the Mississippi. You
Yeah.
know, I'm not talking like a river like the Colorado River going through, you know, or the one here locally, the Shoshone River, uh, that you know is narrow and you can't really take boats down it all the way. You know, you have to have a big river if that's going to decrease the farmland you need.
Yeah,
Uh,
one of the things I've always noticed in fantasy, in a lot of fantasy novels, not all of them, but a lot of them, and a lot of fantasy TV shows, is they have these huge, giant cities,
yeah.
filled with castles and maybe 1 million inhabitants. And I'm just like, it's hard to feed a city of 1 million people now, you
Well,
know?
and that's an obvious thing, but something I didn't really think about because I never really thought about the population of the cities. But the other thing that's really important is salt. You don't have salt in that kind of civilization, then you don't have civilization. And
Yeah.
what that means for a story, really, it's a lot more important than I thought. I never thought about it. I knew people use salt. I knew they mine salt, but if you don't have the control of the production and shipping of salt was basically drove civilization from ancient times through the Middle Ages.
Wars were fought over it.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, I mean, and it also creates things like if you there was a tax in France, I can't remember what it was called, a tax on salt, and it caused like an entire criminal underground to raise up of smuggling salt. And you had outlaws who would rob salt from caravans. They would sell it. Uh, if you were caught smuggling salt, you could be executed. So this is like a whole culture inside your culture that if you don't have it in your book, you know, you failed the verisimilitude test unless you have some kind of magic system that causes magic freezers. You know, so that's like, oh my God. And in the book I was plotting, um, a lot of it takes place in what is modern day um, Switzerland slash Austria area. Well, Hallstatt, which was a Celtic, so you know, cultural center back in ancient times, the pre-Roman Empire days, the reason it existed as a cultural center, as a trading center, is basically a city because there's this huge salt deposit at Hallstatt. And
right? Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so the entire like monarchical and nobility system of that book is going to be built around who controls the salt. So that's something I hadn't thought of. And that's a situation where world building is going to change the nature of your story.
I remember watching a documentary once on the salt mines, and like people would live in them their whole lives. Like they would go to work in the salt mines when they were 18 or 19 years old, and they would die in them,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a few
Like the
years.
coal mines.
Yeah, and they had like these beautiful salt palaces inside the salt mines where they'd carved, whole cities out of the salt, to, the cathedrals and temples and whatnot. And it's really, really, it's like, uh, what's that? What's that place in Lord of the Rings, where the dwarves are? Moria,
Moria.
Moria, but made of salt. It's really cool.
There's no Balrog down there.
Yeah, and this maybe, and, but yeah, it's really important. And it's funny is like you said that's not military sci-fi, but actually it is, because if you've got a planet Hoth, and there's a million people there. How are there a million people there? How are they surviving there? I don't care what advanced technology you have, barring magic, food creation technology. How are they
You're going
surviving?
to have a heck of a transport system to get all the
Yeah,
food there for those people.
you'd have to have constant cargo ships coming with food.
And
Because
any disruption like a war
yeah,
of those cargo ships, everybody starts to starve to death.
yeah, and people get crazy when they start starving to death. Just look at New Orleans in 2006. I mean, it doesn't take more than a couple of days, and all of a sudden civilization doesn't exist anymore.
Was that in
So
2005?
whenever, the Hurricane Katrina
Yeah,
was it
I think it was
five?
five.
It's 5 or 6, yeah. And so that's things you need to be thinking about when you're world building. Like, oh yeah, I have this cool idea for this desert city on this desert planet. That's great. How are they getting water? How are they getting food? How are you supporting a civilization on that planet?
How are they getting the blue milk?
That is bigger than a nomadic tribe, because there's a reason why tribes didn't grow bigger than they did, in Africa and other places like that, because there wasn't the natural resources to support them. And yeah, sure, technology can help with that a little bit, but you can't get salt from a stone.
Yeah. Um, it's funny. Not to go on too large of a tangent here, but
Yeah,
the
world building.
the discoveries that have been made in places like um, Catalhayuk uh, over in Turkey, the first where they found these giant complexes.
Oh, the underground
Yeah,
complexes that could sleep thousands of
yeah,
people.
and what they found is these people were hunter gatherers. They weren't farmers, and they built these huge complexes probably for religious reasons. And I mean, assuming we're not wrong about that,
I've read a couple of different theories about why they exist.
but assuming that the mainstream archaeology is not wrong about that, uh, most people used to think that people gathering in cities was the start of organized religion. That organized like churches and temples with a priest caste didn't start until people gathered in cities and become farmers. But what this shows, if it's true, that organized religion predated civilization and might have been responsible for the creation of cities rather than being a result of the creation of cities, which is interesting as a world building thing. You know,
Yeah, for sure. You,
it could be it. We don't know this for sure because there's no writing or anything. It could be that places like this cause people to start engaging in agriculture because they gathered together in such huge groups for these religious reasons that they couldn't feed them all with hunting and gathering, so they started growing food for them. I mean, that we don't know that. That's just like a supposition, but that's an interesting one that also feeds into the cause and effect that you're going to have in your world building.
yes, the cause and effect is huge because
Because like colony worlds, I dealt with this. There are limited reasons that you would have a lot of star colonies. People just assume, oh, there's faster than light travel. We're going to have colonies all over the place. But why?
colonies are
Why do you
expensive.
have colonies? And people also assume, oh, you have a colony because either Earth is over or the solar system is overpopulated. But that's not really a good reason for a colony because even if you have cheap FTL, getting enough people to a colony to ease overpopulation would be monumental. And it would be much cheaper just to build floating cities in your star system. But there is a psychological, almost a philosophical, almost spiritual reasons why you would spread out if you had the ability to do it. And
There's actually an evolutionary trait
yeah,
for people who are dissatisfied with where they are and they want to go beyond the next hill and beyond the next valley.
And
And
that's important for you to understand if you're going to have a interstellar war. Why are these people in these colonies?
yeah,
What
because
kind
it's
of
like
people are they?
you're not just going to have a colony for the sake of having a colony, and your why you have the colony is going to be dependent on the resources that are there that can be there and the technology you can use to get there. Like if we've got instantaneous universal travel anywhere, then it doesn't, well, it matters less. But assuming you're not doing some sort of magical system, so to speak, where everybody can transport to any planet they want at will, there's a reason why colonies exist, and there's a reason for that planet to be civilized, be habitable or be terraformed or be colonized. And the planet itself, what is available on that planet will tell you a lot about the colony. If it's a really hard planet where nothing grows there is edible and everything has to be grown um, in domes because the soil there is toxic, then that's going to tell you a lot about how that colony is shaped. If you've got like a verdant world where everything is just, a Garden of Eden, that will also tell you how that colony is shaped. And I'm telling you, it won't be as good as you think it will be. So it's really, really dependent on both the technology you take to get there, what you have while you're there, and like what the planet provides. And in a lot of ways, yeah, a floating city in orbit would be easier than going to Mars. It just wouldn't be this. It wouldn't be the same, and it would never have like the growth opportunity, and it would also be really easy to destroy. So, blowing up a planet, as we've talked about in previous episodes, it's a lot harder than blowing up a space station.
Yeah. But also, the existence of other living worlds could serve as a psychological safety valve because if you have an overcrowded world or just a world, not even overcrowded, one where everybody is forced to live in cities, in certain cities, in certain places, and there's no way out, that's going to cause psychological stress. Um, I'm sure you've heard of the rat utopia experiment.
Oh yeah, where they all died?
Yeah, because there's after a certain point of a certain number of people, and it's not anywhere near overpopulation, the society starts breaking down.
Yeah, it was
So
like they were provided everything, right? They
yeah,
had
so
plenty of food,
there
plenty of
needs to
water.
be a safety valve for a civilization to prevent that, and the
Yeah.
just the existence of those colonies, uh, and maybe some kind of system that's not even really very democratic or fair, where you take troublemakers and put them on the colonies, would be something
Oh,
that a government
yeah.
might consider just for reasons of stability.
Yeah, for sure. And you have to, and there's like a whole lot of stuff that goes into this. It's not just like, oh, I'm gonna world build a sci-fi. So what kind of cool spaceship travel do they have? You really gotta, I mean, like, depending on how realistic you want your world to be and how engaging you want it to be, people, when they're reading a book and people don't act like people, your readers will spot it almost instantly. And they may not be able to put a name to it, but they'll know, and it will be off-putting to them. Everybody who's listening to this or watching this can point to a book and say, "Oh yeah, I didn't really feel like character, acted like a human being. They acted more like a plot device, or they acted more like
Yeah,
someone's idea of what that character was." I mean, like, okay, I read a lot of lit RPG, and something that lit RPG authors are not great at are writing well-developed, rounded emails. They tend to write very two-dimensional, oh, you're so wonderful kind of characters. And you can get away with that in that genre because it's more like that's like very much a wish fulfillment power fantasy
yeah,
genre. But when you're writing military sci-fi, people expect it to be in the real world with real people behaving as real people do. So if all of a sudden, and I talked about this in another episode about the girl crying at the station because they were quote surrounded in space. When you have characters that don't behave like people would behave in those situations, it rings false and hollow. And you at that point you probably don't really even have that good world building either. So you really need to it's all kind of related. It's all really connected. If your world building is just like, oh, this is a cool thing, I'm going to have this, and I don't really care what it took for that to be there, then you're going to be in a situation where your world doesn't feel realistic. Things
Right.
happen organically, they happen for a reason. There are cities where they are for a reason. And if you're plopping a city on top of a mountain because it looks cool, and you don't really have a reason why there's a city on top of a mountain where you can't get water, you can't get fresh supplies, and it's a nightmare to get anything up to it, and there's like a million people up there, you need to be able to tell us why such a city exists.
Basically, if you have inland cities, they better be at the confluence of more than one river,
A delta,
or maybe on a big lake. You
yeah.
know, um,
A lake so big you can't see the other side.
and most cities are built on the coast of
Remarkable.
continents. If you look at a continent and look at where the cities were built back in the day, the ones that still exist, most of them are on the coast. The ones that are inland are on big lakes or big rivers, huge rivers. And when I say big, I mean Missouri, the
Mississippi.
Mississippi, the the
Yeah.
Ri- the Rhine.
I mean,
The
look at the Snake River. The Snake River is a big, long river, and as far as I know, there aren't very many
There's
actual
no big
cities
cities on it.
on the Snake River. There's plenty of towns. You have
Towns, yeah.
towns. Towns are different.
So if you're gonna have like a a settlement that is inland on your colony, you better make sure that it's not. You better make sure it's like 6, 7, maybe 10,000 people at the most. You're not going to have 100,000 people living on the Snake River
Yeah.
on a colony
I mean,
colony.
again, logistics and all this other stuff. I know when I was making Alexandria, the capital world for the Alliance, the capital city of the capital world is, on an ocean. It's next to an ocean bay.
Mhm.
And you're like, oh yeah, but they have spaceships. Why would they need water for one? Um,
Still,
Two
we're still going to
resources.
need water, even if you
Yeah,
can even if you can desalinate water, it's got to come from somewhere.
yeah. And also, you're more likely to get, assuming you're not landing in a desert, which it's not, you're more likely to get storms and storm systems that water the area in a northern hemisphere on next to the ocean than you are
And before somebody brings up Dune, Arrakis was only settled because it's the only source
of
for an
spice.
incredibly rare mineral. I mean,
Yeah.
spice, melange that can't be found anywhere else. And if it hadn't
Enormous
been,
amount of resources were piled in settling that
yeah,
world.
and if it hadn't been there, then nobody would have lived on that planet.
Yeah. And, I mean, if you replace Dune with, if you replace the desert with an ice world, it's really easy to understand why nobody would live on an ice world. A
Hmm.
world that's nothing but ice. Maybe an outpost. Maybe if there was like some sort of,
Hey, at least an ice world would have water.
yeah. I mean, there was some sort of like, ships used to use this thing called the sea navigation stations, and they were seas and sea, and they would send out codes. I think there's still some exist, and they'd send out radio beacons, and the ships could home in on those radio beacons. And and if you had like a travel system, if you had a travel system in your universe whereby planets had beacons on them that ships homed in on, then yeah, you could have a reason why you might have an ice planet with a colony on it or something like that. But it would be a very small colony. It would be an outpost. If you have a world though, conversely though, if you have a world that's like verdant and there's plenty of farmland, you need to have a reason why there isn't a big colony on it because, those would seem like they'd be kind of rare and you would have people chomping at the bit to go colonize them.
I mean, it's very possible that you could have food factories in orbit that grow stuff in on artificially created, space stations. But if you're going to have that,
But why?
well, if you're going to have, I was going to say, if you're going to have that, then you would better have a technology that can bring the stuff from living worlds cheaply to those food factories because you can't you can't build a food factory out of no biological stock,
Yeah.
you know, and you're gonna if it's gonna be hydroponics, well, those
It'll
chemicals
come
have
from
to come from
somewhere.
somewhere.
Yeah. And when I say but why, I mean like, but why would you go to all that trouble? There's there's a reason why you'd have to go to all that trouble for that world. And it wouldn't be just because, well, it's a
Yeah,
world and I have people
yeah.
on. Um, you know, let's go
It would
back to
have
that.
to be a it'd have to be a strategic location. Like if you have wormhole travel, maybe there's a system that has a bunch of wormholes that go to key systems. So you have to have that guarded. You have to have
Yeah.
people there. You have to, you know, ship stuff through there. So maybe you have a colony, even if the planet's not very hospitable. You know,
Or
where
maybe
you have
there's a mining outpost on that colony, on that planet, or
yeah.
there's some sort of mineral you're mining on that planet, like spice, or something that
And that's the tricky
worthwhile.
one. That's a tricky one to do for any kind of realistic science fiction because anything you're going to mine, you can probably get from asteroids
Yeah. What you have
a
to do
lot
is you sort
cheaper.
of have to contrive something whereby there are certain elements that are pretty rare, even in the asteroids. And so having it be on a planet, like obviously not
I,
gold and
I've
silver,
only
but
thought of one, well, two things that you have to have a living planet for. One is biologicals, you know, so anything you have to grow. The other is oil.
yeah, because you have to
If
have
oil is still
balance.
important in your civilization, then
Which it would be because there is no way to make plastic without oil. And,
not that we know of.
that we know of, yeah. I mean, obviously, this is all assuming you don't have some sort of, matter transporter that can convert one element to another.
Yeah,
Um, Osmium is pretty rare, even in the asteroids.
yeah.
And so one of my books takes place on a planet where they don't know it, but they have a huge osmium deposit underneath their capital city.
How do they
And
get there?
um, well, I didn't go into it in the book, but I talked to this geologist, and she said that there are places on Earth where there are sort of large osmium deposits, but they're really deep down. And so I just sort of moved this one closer to the surface. And it actually affected the gravity of the planet around that city because it's so dense. And that was my, like, the planet was colonized for another reason, but they ended up finding
Should be a
the
great
osmium later.
should be a great insult for a science fiction novel. You're
Hmm.
so dense, you affect local gravity.
Yeah, it would be a good one, yeah. But it was pretty cool too because it was based on the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. And yeah, I had a lot of fun writing that one. It was Traditions of Courage is the book that one is involved in, and they use osmium in the gravity coils that power the ships that move the ships,
Mhm.
and so it's really really important to have because otherwise you're mining asteroids and you know collecting a little bit at a time. There's a restriction to how many ships you can build because you have to have osmium in order to build it. And it's just a really rare element. It's the densest thing you can find in nature, but it's also really, really rare.
In most of my books, the only way to build the star drives is to create exotic matter from like these huge particle accelerators that are built in the core systems and very close to the sun so they can be powered by, you know, unlimited solar energy.
The my friend and I, Brent O'Gara, Brent, you're listening. He listens to all of our podcasts, so he's listening. We came up with we
Hi,
used to
Brett.
work at T-Mobile together, and one day at lunch we came up with a really cool system by which um, I mean, obviously the technology involved is really out there, but essentially is there was a space station that peeled neutronium off of a black hole um, every rotation until it created these two clamshells of neutronium armor hull. And then the ships were built inside the clamshells. And since you can't penetrate neutronium, all the weapons and everything were where the clamshells meet. So it was like you'd have your weapons and stuff here, and then you had the armor here. And it just took forever it took decades to build one ship. But once you built it, it was, indestructible because it's neutronium. And I always thought that was kind of cool, really far, like 10, 15, 20,000 years in the future kind of sci-fi. little beyond what I normally do, just because once you start creating technologies that are really far afield,
Or you could make that the product of an ancient civilization that's died out, and the main characters find it.
define the ships, yeah, which is a different kind of sci-fi than I write too, but it would also be really, really cool if they found like a battleship that was essentially indestructible that changed the balance of power in the universe.
They named it
Maybe
the
maybe
Yamato.
one that crash lands on Earth and then they have to rebuild it and fight the alien menace that's coming.
With this technology that's maybe you call it Robotech.
I was actually thinking more like the one that you, me, and James
Oh, that, yeah.
outlined.
It's been a while
Um,
since we outlined that, and you never published the podcast, so
because it's our idea. It was a good idea. Still holding out that we might actually do it one day. The but once you start coming up with these like really crazy technologies, like the technology to strip neutrinos off of or neutronium off of a black hole, there are ramifications to that technology. No technology exists in a bubble. So the more advanced your technology, the more impact it has on civilization and colonies and all this other stuff. And if you don't think that through, then you're going to leave yourself open for obvious world building plot holes.
that is another good world building point that is ignored a lot in TV shows and movies. Star Trek: Next Generation. If you have the technology, for instance, of the transporter that you've shown can disassemble somebody, take out some horrible sickness, and put them back together, well, then everybody's immortal. You're not dying at 130 or 140 like Bones. Uh, you're living forever because they
Why
can.
not just have it like they record your pattern when you join Starfleet, and then every time you go through the transporter, you're reset to that age,
Exactly.
you know, so that you never have to
Why do
age.
you have male pattern baldness?
Yeah.
Um, why does
Why do
Jory
you
not have
have
eyes?
Well, and the thing that kills me is they never do this in Star Trek. They do it in the RPGs and they do it in the video games, stuff like that, but they never do it in the TV shows. Um, every time a ship blows up in Star Trek, it self-destructs or whatever, the explosion is huge and massive because they use antimatter to power their engines. Why are you bothering with phasers and photon torpedoes? Why don't you just beam an antimatter bomb onto the Borg ship since you don't seem to have trouble beaming things onto it, and annihilate
Yeah,
it?
I mean, you have to make it clear that you can't, that there's something that keeps you from beaming it, like some kind of defensive thing that all
Well,
the
they do
ships
have
have.
that on occasion, but the moment that's down,
Yeah.
it's game over, you know, because antimatter is not, oh, I'm shooting an energy weapon at you that you can adjust the frequency of your shields at. No, no, it's pure annihilation. So it annihilates all
Well, the
matter you come in
shields, the
contact with.
shields. I mean, if say you had a particle beam weapon that shot antimatter particles, the shields could still disperse
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that.
No, I meant like the Borg drones could adapt to the phasers, because theoretically they were, adapting to the frequency of the weapon and absorbing the energy or whatever nonsense they came up
Well, they're
with.
using some kind of an energy shield.
Yeah. So my, anyways, my point is like there's lots of things in modern sci-fi that people don't think about, and then you get someone incredibly clever who thinks that they're just the smartest person in the room and does the hyperdrive maneuver in Last Jedi and thinks that no one ever thought of that before.
Hmm.
Yes, we did. We thought it was stupid. Visually very pretty, but
I mean, it's not stupid if it works, but the thing is, we've had no indication that it works. And if it did
yeah,
work, it would be, if it did work, you wouldn't have people crashing, standing at the controls, crashing a ship, and you would have hyperdrive missiles.
yeah.
Why are
You
there
put
no hyperdrive
hyperdrive on a
missiles?
piece of rock and fire it at the Death
Or,
Star,
or,
and that
or
would
I
be it.
mean, not a piece of. You have like missiles that are easy to carry on your star destroyers. You shoot them, they go into hyperdrive, they appear in the other ship, and
Obliterate
it
everything.
obliterate everything. Why aren't you doing that? If it's
Yeah.
possible, even if it's like a 1 in a million shot, they would still have hyperdrive missiles because
You'd
they're
still fire, you'd
unmanned.
fire a million missiles.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
it's That's what people don't understand. Oh well, it's a fantasy. No, it's
You
supposed to be
have
science
rules that
fiction.
you have created in your universe.
If you don't have rules, then nothing you wrote means anything.
Yeah.
If there are no rules, then the story doesn't make sense.
The phrase Deus ex machina comes from it literally means God with a machine because at the end of
Got
old
out of the machine.
plays, the God would appear
Yeah.
and he would solve all the problems and that would be it. So if that's what you're going to do at the end of your story, people are going to walk out of your story going, that was stupid because nothing they did mattered.
And people did
Uh,
walk out of that story going,
Yeah,
that was stupid. Uh,
nothing they did mattered. So we're there to watch the characters do stuff that matters. I say watch, read. And if you get to the end of the story and nothing they do matters, then you just wasted however much time you spent reading that book because nothing they did mattered, And it's if
and
you don't understand that, then you don't need to be a writer.
although he is a great writer and very successful, um, the Night's Dawn trilogy by Peter F. Hamilton ended literally with a Deus ex machina, and he basically wrote himself into a corner. He wrote it so that there was no way that the people in that book could win, and they won almost literally because of a god reaching out his hand to solve all the problems.
And when
Um,
you were Peter F. Hamilton,
well, no, yeah, I mean, people said that afterwards. And the book series was very successful because up till that point, it was really incredibly well done. But the ending sucked.
a lot of people can't stick the ending. A
He
lot.
had Stephen King disease.
Yeah, Stephen King's
That's
famous for not being able to stick the
Stephen
ending.
King, The Stand, famous for crappy ending because spoilers for a book that's like 30 something years old, but the main characters are told by God to go to Las Vegas and confront the bad guy.
The devil.
And then what happens in the end is one of the bad guy's minions brings an old nuclear warhead into Vegas, and the hand of God reaches down and touches it and sets it off and blows everything up, including the main characters. Well, why did the main characters need to be there? Why did God send them to Vegas? He could have just had the guy bring the. If God is going to solve the problem, why couldn't he just set off the nuclear weapon without the main characters
I
being there?
love stories that involve God written by atheists.
Yeah.
Really just yeah, it's always enlightening. I thought Steven Spielberg was religious and turns out he's not. Because his latest movie was, he was like, I
And
think this movie is
it's a
going to
ridiculous
shake
conceit.
Christianity's foundations.
And it's a ridiculous conceit for a number of reasons. For one thing, a lot of Christian, I don't want to say sects, but denominations accept the possibility of there being alien life. It's not. I mean, Catholic Church for sure. It's not like anathema. It's not going to shake Christianity to its foundations. And also, I find it very interesting that Steven Spielberg, he said it's going to shake people's faith in religion, but he doesn't really mean religion. He's talking about a particular faction of Christian religion.
Yeah,
Because nobody ever comes out and says, well, this movie is going to shake people's faith in Judaism. This is
yeah,
going to shake people's faith in Islam. It's not going to
yeah.
shake Buddhist faith. The Buddhists wouldn't care. Hindus,
You wouldn't go see the movie.
well, I don't. They might, but I'm saying they wouldn't care if aliens came. Hindus would totally accept the fact that there's aliens.
Especially
Uh,
if they had forearms.
yeah, and there's lots of religions, and you're talking not even about, not you. Spielberg's talking not even about Christianity. He's talking about a certain narrow evangelical Christianity
Yeah.
that doesn't accept the idea. But Catholic Church, which is the biggest denomination, accepts aliens. The Mormons accept the idea of aliens. There's a bunch of other. I don't know about
We actually
Lutherans,
read more than
Methodists.
accept the idea of
I,
aliens is we believe that they
I
exist.
know.
Worlds without end.
I don't know about Lutherans or Methodists, but I mean, there's a lot of denominations that accept that there could be life out there, and it wouldn't shake their foundations at all.
I just always think it's funny where they're like, oh, you're a Christian or you believe in God, so you just believe there's just one world. Like, why would I just believe that He created just this world and all the other
I mean,
worlds?
I know there are people out there who believe that stuff.
There
That
are people who believe the Earth is flat too,
I
but
know, but that's Spielberg showing his age,
yeah,
because that was a thing in the 70s.
yeah.
That's not been that way for a long, long time.
It would have been. I would have really liked to if it had been cool, kind of like a Close Encounters sort of thing, you know, if he had just done that. But man, he had to be all getting all in religious business.
But
The
I mean, I don't know that the movie has any of that in. I think that's just him talking about it. But it's the problem with the movie, and the reason I'm really not interested in seeing it, is because it ignores modern civilization. He has this thing at the end. I won't say what it is, but where things are disclosed, stuff is revealed. But the real reaction by people to that would be nowadays, that's fake, that's AI, that's not convincing.
yeah,
Putting this stuff on a TV station isn't going to convince anybody.
no,
Hardly anybody's watching anymore.
yeah,
So
yeah. Like
that's
you
like
said, it's him showing his age.
yeah, it's Spielberg thinking it's still the 1980s or 90s.
Yeah.
Uh, Even if you put this all over the internet, nobody's going to believe it.
Well, and it sounds like we've gone off track, but we really haven't because that's world building,
It is
right?
world building. If you don't
And he
understand the
he's so
world
he
that you
built
live
this
in,
world that completely ignores the real world, and everybody watching it is like, but that's not how the real world operates.
no,
Not
no.
how anything operates. Um, I
If we
challenge
had if we
anybody
had
to
an
think
alien invasion on Earth, people who were not in the city being invaded, who saw reports, would
wouldn't believe
assume
it.
that it's fake,
Yeah,
that
it'd
it's
be,
AI.
and honestly, how different is that than War of the Worlds in the 1930s?
Yeah.
So the when you're building a world, just make sure that it passes, the sniff test. Is it something that is believable that could happen, and do people act and behave in a believable manner?
Mhm.
Um, and with that disclosure,
Ha.
we should probably give it a call because Rick's got to go to Chattanooga.
Yeah. Well, that's not for a few hours, but yeah, I'm going to LibertyCon. Um,
So are you probably not gonna be here next week? So let's make sure that we do a LibertyCon wrap up.
I will. I should be back. Let me check. Yeah, I'll be back for next week.
Okay,
Definitely.
cool. So next week we'll be doing a LibertyCon wrap up. I wish I was going with you, buddy, but I hope you have a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I wish you were there too.
Yeah.
I wish anybody I knew was going to be there.
I keep saying this, but next year,
Yeah.
maybe next year I can start going to cons again. All right, everybody, like, subscribe, share, and have a great day.